Thank you. Um, so just to give some motivation for this talk, um, when thinking about scientific data and the publication of data from experiments, historically this has been through uh, academic publications, scientific papers, and I'm working specifically with single-cell biology data, where you have these millions of cells and you're often profiling thousands of genes for each cell. And every reader of this publication may have their favorite gene and want to look at how this is expressed across many cells. So the solution to this problem has been to develop these data portals where we have these interactive visualizations of the same data. So you can see here, this is just an example. We have a paper on the left, and then the same data set we have in this interactive data portal on the right. Um, but we often treat these as entirely separate processes, despite the data being the same, the data formats, and then wanting to use similar visualization designs. And often even the audience of who's looking at these things is actually the same. And more generally, when we're selecting a visualization toolkit, there are these many dimensions, like we want our visualization to run on the web versus the desktop, or we might want something static or interactive, something that's an SVG or a bitmap image. Um, and all of these toolkits, or many of them at least, duplicate this logic and effort for data loading, coloring data points, sizing data points, positioning data points, data transformations, etc. So why do we keep reinventing the wheel when we're developing this type of visualization software? And so there are potential solutions to this, like if we have a web-based visualization software toolkit, we could run this from a desktop app by including it in like a web view or, similar things in Jupyter notebooks like these web-based widgets. Um, if we have a desktop-based toolkit, maybe we just embed this in our web app by making an HTTP request. Um, of course, that requires more infrastructure on the back end. So then with WebAssembly, maybe we want to compile one of these desktop toolkits and use WebAssembly to visualize something in our web app. And so this paper in 2024 makes this remark that the technologies of WebGPU and WebAssembly are seen as promising for this write once, run everywhere visualization software. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So the wish list here is that we want to use the same code across programming languages, including in a web browser and in desktop applications. And in our desktop applications, we don't want to require like an embedded web browser, web view, etc. We want ideally the same code to power the static and interactive visualization rendering. And we want to scale to out-of-core dataset sizes. As I mentioned in the single cell case, these datasets can be very large and other domains as well. Um, and we ideally want the same code to be used for bitmap and vector graphics output. And just for simplicity, we want these things decoupled, like we want to decouple our software from how we're doing this coordinated multiple views if we have multiple interactive plots that we want to be linked together. And we also don't want to be coupled to a specific GUI framework or event loop type of setup. And ideally, we also want this small WebAssembly binary size so that we can feasibly create web applications around this software. So today I'll tell you about Pluot, which I'm claiming is addressing all of these goals. And the binary size one is kind of subjective, but it's less than 4 MB, which I think is pretty good. So just as a uh, demonstration, you can see in our website that there are these embedded interactive plots, like these basic bar plots. You can embed plots in this Rust-based GUI frameworks like eGUI and others. Um, in Python, we have bindings so that you can embed plots as either static images, SVGs, or these widgets, which I'll show a brief video here, where we're ultimately using the same parameters up to plot to a bitmap image and SVG here. As you can see, we can like select the text. And then in this WebAssembly widget, we can zoom and pan and do these interactions. We can even like dynamically change the width or other properties. Um, I'm not showing it here, but you could also imagine you change the image channel colors or the intensity ranges, or even like which Z slice you're viewing of a 3D data set. So the current status of this project is that there's this core Rust crate, and then on top of that, there's bindings for JavaScript with WebAssembly. I developed a React component, and then in Python, you can plot to these static images as you were seeing, as well as in any widget, which internally uses the JavaScript WebAssembly-based uh, npm package. And then in R, there's also um, we also have bindings for R right now for the static plotting. And so I'll talk a little bit about how this is working. So I think one of the main strengths or the main ways that I've achieved this is by embracing these more stateless and declarative paradigms, which I'll talk about. Here we're using WebGPU via WGPU, this Rust crate that allows running this WebGPU code in a web browser or in a standalone desktop application, which is very helpful. And then, as others in the talks today have even mentioned, this great ecosystem around Rust that allows us to compile to WebAssembly very easily, as well as to Python with PyO3 and and in R. There's similar projects like this Extend R project make this possible. And also the small binary size is made possible by thinking about the web-based use case from the beginning. So a little bit more details. When we're thinking about interactive plotting and how to unify that with static plotting, the way that we're doing this is we render um, on every user interaction, and we kind of treat the interactive plotting as just many static frames. And then this re-rendering is delegated to the caller, like in the JavaScript case, the um, we detect the panning and zooming interactions and then just have JavaScript call this Rust-based rendering function. Um, and then, as I mentioned, I wanted to avoid coupling this to a particular GUI framework or UI framework. So the way that we're doing this is by having this kind of stateless and functional approach to managing the camera for these zooming and panning interactions. So you just take your previous camera matrix and your mouse event and you get your next matrix out, which is a bit, it's based on some existing JavaScript-based camera control libraries, but those are typically like these objects, and then you're just mutating your object on every interaction. Um, and then to get this bitmap and vector graphics outputs, I'm using this layer-based API. So at the leaf nodes, kind of you can imagine the most primitive like drawing commands. You do have to implement these twice, like for text and for lines and for points and those basic glyphs. But then now that those are abstracted in this core Rust crate, or sorry, implemented in this core Rust crate, we can create these like higher level layers that internally call the draw functions of these lower level layers. And then these higher level layers are much easier to implement in pure Rust. So if you want to implement something custom, you might not even need to go down to the web GPU level. And you could call these existing layer types directly. Um, so these layer traits, the core ones are this prepare function where you can load your data. You can even bail out of this loading process early and just render, a partial visualization or nothing. And in this prepare function, you could also call web GPU compute operations for like this general purpose compute. And you can also, this is where you can do caching. So in these interactive plots, if your next frame is rendering basically the same data, you can cache that in kind of this React inspired memoization method. And then for the drawing, there's kind of this one drawing trait. At the lowest level, as I mentioned, you can call the web GPU drawing for your render pass, or at the higher level, you can just pass your render pass into a different sublayer. Um, And then picking is also important in the interactive case. So where which point is under my mouse, that's this picking operation. So at the lowest level, your layer might have to actually decide which point is below the mouse. But at a higher level, maybe your sub layer already implements this and you just delegate to that. Um, so here, this compute operations, if you have a GPU, we can use a WGPU, and if you don't, we can use a CPU-based fallback. And similarly for the drawing case, if you want vector graphics, right now that happens actually on the CPU. And if you want bitmap graphics, that happens on the GPU with WGPU. There's a potential that maybe we could also implement like a CPU based fallback for those bitmap drawing commands, but that's uh, for future work. And then how do we scale to these large data set sizes? So right now we're using ZAR, which others have also spoken about, but we in the imaging for bioimages, we have this OME-ZAR standard where we store the tiles of an image using these ZAR arrays. And this allows for easily abstracting if your image is stored in the file system, in a zip file, or on HTTP. And so your store just asks for a particular key, which might correspond to one of these array uh, chunks here, and then you get back some bytes. You could ask for also like a range of bytes as well. So basically, the way this works when you're plotting is you say, I need this image region based on like your camera parameters, and then we go to ZARs, this REST-based ZAR library, and then if you're using these other language bindings, you would have a ZAR store in that language as well that is kind of communicating back and forth through this language binding boundary, and then you get your bytes back in REST. And we can do this not just for arrays, but also for like any arbitrary binary data like fonts. You might ask for a particular font that you want to use for your text in your plot, and then you would go out to your ZAR store and have this convention where if you have this font's prefix, maybe then you know, okay, I want these font bytes, and then you would get those back. So next steps would be to do some more profiling of like comparing this approach to existing approaches and adding new layer types for like different types of 2D visualizations or maybe even 3D like volumetric imaging visualizations, which could benefit from like having their complex logic being more reusable across languages. And then having additional interaction types like being able to do lasso selections would be more future work, as well as being able to render not only to SVG or bitmap graphics from Rust, but maybe you actually just want your Rust code to produce your Python script or your Python notebook or your, HTML file, and that might be a possible future way to more easily enable this interoperability between computing environments. And then, of course, right now we're only supporting JavaScript, Python, and R, but maybe you want to use this from a different language. So additional language bindings would be future work. And you can also see a bunch of open GitHub issues if you want more details there. But I'm happy to take questions and thanks for listening.